Before we begin class, Jerry, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Yes. Great Holy Father, hallowed be your name. We come to you today to honor you and learn more about your word and praising Jesus Christ. We help those who are unable to come here today and help everyone that is in trouble. They need you, Lord. Thank you. We pray to you through the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay. We started discussing the book of Leviticus on Wednesday. Chris did an overview of the entire book. And Chris mentioned something on Wednesday that I want to repeat this morning. The first book of the Bible is named Genesis, which means beginning or origin. The second book of the Bible is named Exodus, which means departure. The Israelites departed the land of Egypt. And the third book, where we're just now getting into, is called Leviticus, which means pertaining to or of the Levites. So remind me what tribe the priests were from. Levi, yes. In the King James, I got a bunch of numbers for you. You're not going to be able to remember all this, but in the King James Version of the Bible, the word priest, words priest or priests are found 195 times in the book of Leviticus. The words offer, offered, or offereth are found 94 times in Leviticus. The words offering or offerings are found 284 times. So if you combine offer and offerings, the total of form of the word offer is found in the book of Leviticus 378 times. There's 27 chapters. That means it's an average of 14 times a chapter. The word offer, or the form of it, is in the book of Leviticus. I thought that was interesting. The words burn, burned or burneth, burning or burnt, are found 132 times in the book of Exodus. The word fire is found 74 times. The phrase burnt offering or burnt sacrifice is found 62 times. And the phrase an offering made by fire is found 42 times. So, in the book of Leviticus, we will be discussing priests and offerings, and specifically burnt offerings. It's very obvious. Matter of fact, in chapter 1 alone, we will find offer or offering itself 8 times, an offering made by fire 3 times, burnt offering or burnt sacrifice 8 times, and the priest 6 times. That's just in the first chapter. So we get an idea. The book's called Leviticus, which means something to do with the Levites. And we can see we're going to be talking about duties of the priests, and we're going to be talking about offerings, and a lot of different things. But everything we read in this book is not just pertaining to the priests, is it? Priests had duties, but we're going to see right off the bat here in this first chapter that the priests had duties, but so did those that were making the offerings. So it wasn't just for the priests. Is that too many numbers and too quickly for you? I just thought it was very interesting that we're going to read the word offer or offering 14 times a chapter. That's a lot. But it gives us a good idea of what we're going to be discussing. Any comments? Okay. Let's go ahead and get into Leviticus then. So I want to start off this morning by reading the very first verse of the book and the very last verse of the book. So this morning, let's start by reading Leviticus 1, verse 1. Joanna, would you read that?
Now the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting, saying.
Okay, now let's flip over to chapter 27 and verse 34, which is the last verse of the book. And Mom, would you read that? Leviticus 27:34. from these two verses, who did the commands come from? Yeah. Where any command should come from, right? They came from God, the Lord through Moses. And who were these commands meant for?
Children of Israel.
That we just, the last verse we just read, for the children of Israel. So the commandments came from God through Moses to the Israelites. Talking about all those numbers I gave you earlier, the book starts off, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him. Something I found interesting is we will find, again, I said earlier, there's 27 chapters in the book of Leviticus. 20 of those 27 chapters start off, the Lord spoke to Moses. Almost every chapter, that's what starts it. Maybe that's why they chose to start the chapters there, because of course man decided where to divide the chapters up. But anyway, I did find that interesting. 20 of the 27 chapters start with the Lord spoke to Moses or some form of that. So, verse 1, Leviticus 1:1, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle meeting. Is that something different? Has something changed? Well, let's flip back to the book of Exodus, and let's read chapter 19 and verse 3. And Michelle, would you read that? Exodus 19, verse 3.
And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, Tell the children of Israel.
So when they get to Sinai, how was God communicating with Moses? He had to go up the mountain, right? We talked about it at one point. I remember I added up. At that point, we had like 7 trips he had made back and forth. A couple of them were lengthy trips, and others weren't quite as many. But there for a while, God communicated to Moses. Moses had to go up to Mount Sinai. Here in Leviticus chapter 1, it says he spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting. Well, we just got through studying chapter 40 of Exodus, and what happened? They raised the tabernacle. So something has changed. So now we don't see Moses having, and I'm sure Moses was like, I'm tired of having to make that trip up that mountain. So God now is speaking to them from the tabernacle. And back to Exodus 25 for just a moment. Exodus again, chapter 25. And let's read verses 21 and 22. This is when God is describing to Moses how he wants the Ark of the Covenant. But Exodus 25, verses 21 and 22. And Merwin, would you read that?
Thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I will give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel.
So it's something God's talking about in the future. How's he going to communicate with them?
Above the mercy seat.
Yeah, they're going to hear from the mercy seat, from above the mercy seat, between the cherubim. Now this is in the future. And then we get to here to Exodus chapter 40, and the tabernacle is raised up. The ark is in the most holy place where it's supposed to be. And now we see for Leviticus 1:1 that God is speaking to Moses from the tabernacle of meeting. So exactly what God said was going to happen, we see that happening. But let's turn to Numbers chapter 7, which we talked about this before. The book of Leviticus, the whole book, they're still sitting there at Sinai. Not much time goes by between the end of Exodus and Numbers. But let's read Numbers chapter 7 and the very last verse, verse 89. Gives us the same idea of what's happening here. So, Tina, would you read that? Numbers 7, verse 89. we see things have changed. Now God is speaking to them from the top of the mercy seat, from the tabernacle, and that's what God said would happen, and we see that happening. And we talked about this before, that there are several verses in the Bible that they talk about from the one who was taught between, or the ones who dwell between the two cherubim. There's other verses that God's described that way, and that's what it's talking about. He spoke to the Israelites from the top of the mercy seat between the two cherubim. So back to Leviticus chapter 1. Starts off with God speaking to Moses from the tabernacle. Now let's go ahead and read verses 2 through 9. And here in this chapter, we're going to be reading about burnt offerings. That's what the chapter starts off with. So, but Leviticus chapter 1, verses 2 through 9. Sandy, would you read 2 through 5, and then Jeff 6 through 9?
Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, if any man of you bring an offering unto the Lord, he shall bring your offering of the cattle, even of the herd, and of the flock. If his offering be a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own military within the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord. And he shall put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering, and it shall be accepted from him to make atonement for him. And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priest, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood and sprinkle the blood round about on the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation.
And he shall skin the burnt offering and cut it into its pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar, and lay wood in order on the fire. Then the priest, Aaron's son, shall lay the parts, the head, and the fat in order on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. And he shall wash its entrails and its legs with water. And the priest shall burn all on the altar as a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord.
Okay. Verse 2. God speaking to Moses and says, tell the children of Israel this. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any one of you, who's he speaking to when he says this? The Israelites. We just got through saying that. Speak to the children of Israel and say. So he's, when any one of you. But in saying that, I do want to mention this. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 15. We've talked about this some before, but it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves. Numbers chapter 15, and we're going to read verses 14 to 16. And Thad, would you read that? Numbers, where am I at? Numbers 15, verses 14 to 16.
And if a stranger sojourn with you, or whosoever be among your generation, and will offer an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor to the Lord, and ye do, so ye shall do. One ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation, and also for the stranger that sojourns with you, an ordinance forever in your generation, as ye are, so shall the stranger be before the Lord. One law and one manner shall be for you, and for the stranger that sojourneth with you.
Now, what it's talking about here is not someone that's passing through. It's talking about someone that's not an Israelite, but is living there with them. When it talks about it, because it says a stranger who dwells with you. Did that stranger have different rules than the Israelites? No, it was all the same. And verse 14 specifically says, if this person wants to offer an offering, they've got the same rules as you do. They want to do that's fine, but they follow the rules. So there was no difference. If they wanted to, and what do we call that? How is it described in the New Testament? A Gentile that decided to become and follow the Jewish religion was called a what? Nobody remembers? Proselyte? You've heard that before? That's what we're talking about here. someone that's not an Israelite decides to become and follow the Jewish religion. No difference. The rules doesn't change. God's not like that, is he? He didn't have a rule for the Jews and a different rule for the Gentiles as far as this is. They followed the same law. If they decided to be part of God's law, it was the same one. No difference. So when it says anyone, it is specifically talking to the Israelites, but it also includes those that might be Gentiles that have decided to become part of the Jewish religion. So back to Leviticus chapter 1. So if they decide they're going to make an offering to the Lord of the livestock, there's two categories of livestock here talked about here. What are the two categories?
Cattle and flock.
Yeah. The New King James says herd and flock, yes. Do we remember, we talked about this back in, it's been a while, but there was a difference here. Anybody remember what herd and what flock refers to? Michelle?
Herd is like bulls and goats, and flock is like sheep.
No. Sorry. The herd is talking about cattle. Merwin just mentioned cattle. That's what it's talking about. Cattle, bulls, oxen, that's herd. Flock is talking about goats and sheep. We're going to read that here in just a little bit. It tells us what flocks refer to anyway. So when it says this, God makes, and there's a difference we read about before when he was talking about different animals and different things. Sometimes he talks about cattle, and sometimes he's talking about sheep and goats. And that's what he's saying here. When you come to bring your offering, whether it's cattle or if it's sheep and goats, we're going to see there's different. They're very similar, but there are different rules depending on which these categories they bring their offering from. And that's what in this here in verses 3 through 9 we're reading about an offering from the herd. So we're talking about cattle. He wants, okay, so they, in verse 3, if his offering is a burnt sacrifice of the herd, cattle, what kind of cattle are we talking about here? Male, a bull, okay, yes. Talking about a bull. And what else do we know about this offering? Without blemish. So what does that mean?
Without no spots.
They're not hurt. They're not sick.
All of those are
healthy.
exactly. It's easier to say that, isn't it? There's a lot of things, but we're going to read some verses here. Specifically, God says, it shall not be this. But yeah, it's got to be a healthy animal, period. They couldn't offer some disease, sickly looking, because they're not going to be able to sell it anyway. It's not any good to me. I'll just offer that to God. No, that's not the way it works with God, is it? You offer him your best. When we talked about the feast that they were to, the feast of harvest and that, what were they to offer God first? The first fruits went to God, didn't they? And they were the best. No change here. So let's turn now, in case so we know what we're talking about without blemish. Let's turn to Leviticus chapter 22. We're going to read verses 19 to 24. Leviticus 22, 19 to 24. And Bob, would you read those? You have a comment?
And before I do, in the previous verse, I think it's incredibly noteworthy that the sacrifice made must be of your own voluntary. If it's not voluntary, if your heart's not in it, the Lord doesn't want it no matter how unblemished it might be. It doesn't cover your heart by any means.
Right.
I think that's where we're starting here. Verse 5.
Leviticus 22, verses 19 to 24.
Verse 19, ye shall offer at your own will a male without blemish, of the Bibes of the sheep or of the goats. But whatsoever hath a blemish, that shall ye not offer.
through 24.
Oh, blind or broken or maimed or having a weed or a scurvy or a scab, ye shall not offer these unto the Lord, nor make an offering by fire of them upon the altar unto the Lord. Either a bullock or a lamb that hath anything superfluous or lacking in his parts, that mayest thou offer for a free will offering. But for a vow it shall not be accepted. Ye shall not offer unto the Lord that which is bruised, or crushed, or broken, or cut, neither shall you make any offering thereof in your hand.
Okay, so without blemish means no defects. Can't be blind, broken, maimed. Can't have sores or scabs. They were not to be offered. They couldn't be bruised, crushed, torn, cut. Again, what Carl said, they got to be healthy. But there is one thing mentioned here that in verse 23, a bull or a lamb that has a lamb too long or too short may be offered as a free will offering, but not as a vow. Again, as we've talked about, God is very specific, wasn't he, to the Israelites? This law could be tough with all these offerings we're going to be reading about. It could be tough on them and hard to do, but they knew exactly what they needed to do and how it was to go. It wasn't that they didn't understand it, they just chose not to follow it, but God's very specific here. Carl, you had a comment?
We got to notice through all of these offerings, it's always free will. It's because the people wanted to do it. It's always free will. Same way with our giving today. It has to, not grudgingly, it has to be free will. Well, that's all of these offerings here, that comes first. It has to be of a willing mind or free will. It is because the people want to do it.
Well, what if they did it even though they didn't have free will, but they did it, offered it anyway? Didn't do any good, did it? That's right. That's what this is saying. If you go ahead and make an offering when you don't really want to, then don't bother. It's not doing you any good. Yeah. Can we say that same thing about ourselves now, today, in the New Testament? Absolutely. If we don't do it with the right attitude, it's not doing us any good. And we've talked about it many times before, specifically giving on the first Sunday, but anything we do for God, sacrifice-wise, singing or teaching or praying, it doesn't matter what we do. If we don't do it voluntarily with the right attitude, we're not doing ourselves any good. But in reading this about these no defects, they were to give the best of their animals. It was to be a bull, and they were to give the best for this burnt offering. And when I read all this about no defects, it made me think of something else. Let's turn to the New Testament. We'll make this quick because we don't want to get back to the old Leviticus here, but let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 1. Just a reminder, verses 18 and 19. There was a sacrifice that happened after all these offerings we're going to be reading about in the old law. Between then and now, there's been a different sacrifice. And we don't have to offer one ever again, do we? 1 Peter 1, verses 18 and 19. And Carl, would you read that?
For as much as you know that you were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold from your vain conversation received by tradition from your fathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot.
So the new law comes along, and there was a sacrifice, wasn't there? But one sacrifice. We read in the New Testament, one time only. That's all it took, because he was the perfect sacrifice. So the old law, they had all these sacrifices they had to do repeatedly. The Day of Atonement, every year they had to do certain things, and then all these monthly offerings, daily offerings. We got all these offerings we're going to be studying about that the Israelites did because God required it. But after that law went away and Jesus came and the new law came, he came once, forever, for everyone. Done. And he was as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. So that's the only sacrifice that can free us from sin. Any comments? Okay, back to Leviticus 1, and studying all that, I had to mention that. We need to remember that ourselves. We have someone came and sacrificed for us, gave up his life for us, and he did nothing wrong. But and all this conversation about free will, that's where I was going to go next. It had to be voluntary, didn't it? They had to want to give this animal. And there would be some, I'm sure there was many. We see about the attitude and how well the Israelites followed the law, or how they didn't follow the law. Later on, we see all these things. When they get to the land of promise, they get ready to have the first Passover, Joshua has to circumcise all of them, because the next generation, they didn't do that while they were in the wilderness, period. Was that something God told them to do? Yes, they didn't do it. You think there were times that they offered bulls that they really didn't want to? That's my prize bull. I got to give that to God. Wrong attitude, and it didn't do them any good, so they gave up that bull for no reason, because they didn't have the right attitude. But that's what we're reading about here. Let's turn and read from Exodus chapter 25. Exodus chapter 25. And we're going to read just verse 1. We've already talked about this, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it has to do with what Bob and you both, Carl, have brought up. Free will. We're to do it willingly. Exodus 25, verse 1. And Jerry, would you read that?
Exodus 25, verse 1.
Yes.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, this is what he said. Verse 1, right?
Yeah, go ahead and read verse 2. Yes.
Speak unto the children of Israel that they bring them an offering of every man that giveth forth and willing with his heart, and shall take my offering.
And this is talking about, again, when God was telling Moses, this is why I want a tabernacle built. I want this built, and I need the Israelites to give an offering to me so we can get this built. How are they to do it? Who gives it willingly from his heart. And we've already talked about this before. That's what God said. Those that want to, that's where I want it from. Now let's flip over to Exodus 35, verse 21. And Stacy, would you read that?
Then everyone came whose heart was stirred, and everyone whose spirit was willing, and they brought the Lord's offering for the work of the tabernacle of meeting, for all its service, and for the holy garments.
So God tells Moses, I want them to give it freely. I want it offered from the heart. Did they do that?
He did that so much more. They brought more than they needed.
Exactly. Not only did they do it, they kept giving. Every morning they were giving more. To the point in chapter 36, we've already studied it, so we won't go there and read it, but in chapter 36, Moses had to go to the Israelites and say, stop. We've got more than we need already. Stop your giving. So even though it's easy to condemn the Israelites, there were times they did things right. And here God said, do it willingly. They did so, and they gave it in abundance. So, back to chapter 1 of Leviticus then. So this offering is, if he gives it from the herd, cattle, it was to be a bull without blemish. It was to be of his own free will. And where was he to give the bull? Where was he to give it? Described here. At the door of the tabernacle. Okay. And I mention that because we read something a little different when we get to the flock. But yes, at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. And what was the one who's giving this offering? Not the priest. What was the one that giving this offering? What was he to do?
Put his hand on the head of the offering.
Yep, verse 4 here. put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. So we talked about this before when, like they were passing their sins onto this animal. So they were to put their hand on the head of the animal. That's the person that's offering the offering, not the priest. Okay, now, verse 5. He shall kill the bull before the Lord. Who's that talking about? The person offering the offering. That's right. That person was to kill, not the priest. The one offering the offering was to kill the bull before the Lord. And then we read about priests getting involved, don't we? We bring the bull to the tabernacle, the door of the tabernacle, and he puts his hand on the head, and he kills the bull there. And then what do we read about happening? Well, yeah, after they kill the bull, the priests get involved in it, don't they? They take the blood. What do they do with the blood? They sprinkle it around the altar of burnt offering. That's right, which is by the door of the tabernacle meeting. And then verse 6, he shall skin the burnt offering. Who was that talking about? Again, the same person that's giving the offering was to skin the animal. That's right.
So they can cut it in pieces.
Yeah, we haven't got there yet, but yes, that's what's next, absolutely. So when I said, we talked about this earlier, this is written, Leviticus is about the tribe of Levi, you might say, of the Levites. And it is, we have a lot of things here that priests have to do. But the Israelites had responsibilities too, didn't they? They're the ones that had to pick out that animal. They're the ones that had to make sure it was male without blemish. They had to bring it to the door of the tabernacle. They had to put their hands on its head. They had to kill it. They had to skin it. As Jerry just brought up, he was going to cut it into pieces. All of that was the one giving the offering, not the priest. So far, the priest had taken the blood and sprinkled it around on the altar. Now, the one offering skins the animal and cuts it into pieces. Let's turn now to Leviticus chapter 7 and read verse 8. But this was interesting. Leviticus 7 and verse 8. Would you read that, Hilda?
And the priest who offered anyone burnt offerings, that the priest shall have himself the skin of the burnt offering which he has offered.
So who got the skin? Who ended up getting the skin? What we might say the pelt, I guess you might say, from the bull. Who did it go to? Priest. That's right. So they bring an offering, the one offering it, they skin the animal, and the priest got that. Doesn't say specifically what the priest was to do with it, whether it was for blanket. I mean, I don't know what all they did with pelts back in the day, but that would have been something, or coats, or well, I don't know. But I thought that was interesting that this offering, all but the skin is going to get burnt up, but that skin went to the priest for a burnt offering. So then the one offering it cuts the animal up. We've already talked about that. And the priests, now the priests get involved again. They've already taken the blood and spread it around, and the animal's been cut up. What are the priests doing now? Verse 7.
Cut it up into pieces.
Well, that one offering, cut it up. After the animal's cut up, what do the priests do? They've got the fire ready to go, right? They were responsible for getting the fire ready, getting the wood where it needed to be, and getting the fire ready. And then they take the parts, the one offering it, they take the parts and put it on the fire, on the altar. Specifically in verse 8, it talks about the head and the fat to put on the altar. Then we read in verse 9, he. Who's the he again? The one doing the offering. What was he to do here in verse 9? It was to wash the entrails. What's the entrails?
Guts.
Bowels. And its legs with water. So after he cuts the animal up and gets it ready, there's certain parts here that had to be washed first before they were burnt. Here we talk about the bowels and its legs. He was responsible, the one offering, for doing that. And then he gave it to the priest, and the priest did what? He burnt it all. So everything of that animal that was there, it all got burnt up except for skin, which went to the priest. And if they did that correctly, that made God happy, right? It says here in verse 9, it was a sweet aroma to the Lord that made him happy. They followed his law. So that was a burnt offering for something offered from the herd, cattle, right? So there's a lot for the person giving the offering to do here, isn't there? The Israelites still had a lot of responsibilities, even though the priest was there to do what they were to do to make sure it's done right. The one offering had a lot of responsibilities here themselves.
Does it always depend of a bull, or can it be of a goat or a sheep?
Yeah, we talked about that in verse 2, but we're getting in verse, the specifics from it is coming next. Verses 3 through 9 is the offering for cattle. Verses 10 through 13 here, we're reading about the flock, which is a goat or a sheep, yes. Any comments so far? We're going to talk about this old law because it's there and it's interesting. We're not going to be quite as deep maybe as we have been on some things because this isn't our law anymore, is it? It's interesting to learn from it and what all they had to do, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on different things like this because there's just a lot of stuff here in the old law. We'd be here forever. But we see here, if they offered a cattle, it was to be a male without blemish, and we read about what all was to happen to make God happy. Now let's read verses 10 through 13. This is going to be about the flock, or the goats, or the sheep. So Leviticus chapter 1, verses 10 through 13. And Chris, would you read those?
If his offering is of the flocks, of the sheep, or of the goats, as a burnt sacrifice, he shall bring a male without blemish. He shall kill it on the north side of the altar. The priest shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar, and he shall cut it in pieces with its head and its fat, and the priest shall lay them in order on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. But he shall wash the entrails and the legs with water. Then the priest shall bring it all and burn it on the altar. It is a burnt sacrifice, an offering made by fire, a sweet aroma to the Lord.
Chris gets the last say, I guess. Okay, well, be prepared. I'm not sure exactly where Chris wants to start up at. He might have some more he wants to talk about that we already discussed, but if not, be prepared to start up here in verse 10 and talk about the burnt offering for the flock.